Welcome to Grace Church, a fellowship that's been serving the South Coast for over 23 years. Grace Church is more than a congregation. They're a family of believers who are ready to welcome you to a place where you can feel the tangible grace of God. Join Grace Church every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for a time of contemporary worship and a relevant message from the Word of God. For more information, please visit gchurch.us. And now here's Pastor Ron Moore with this week's timely message.
So it's good to be with you this morning. It's good to be here always, to get up from the back of the stage where I'm playing the bass, and haven't had an opportunity to share for a long time. It's been a few years since I had a chance to do this. I do want to share something that's kind of been on my heart. So it's out of John 8. So if you want to kind of go there just so that you can know the story. It's a common story. It's one that we hear probably preached about a lot. And it's a story of the woman who was caught in adultery and brought to Jesus. All right, so that's just that. But let me give you a back up just a little bit. Let's go back to John chapter 1, all right? Jesus was baptized, and then he picked his disciples, and right? So remember, he was just beginning his ministry, and so he gets baptized by John. In chapter 2, he does his first miracle, turns water into wine at the wedding. Remember that? Then later on, in chapter 2, he clears the temple. So he's just getting after it. Chapter 3, talking to Nicodemus. That conversation is, you must be born again. Like Nicodemus is saying, what, am I going to fit back in my mother's womb? And Jesus is saying, no, you don't get it. It's not about getting in your mother's womb. You must be born again by the Spirit. In chapter 4, he meets the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. It's at that point that he says to her, like, there is living water that you know not of. I kind of sound like a King Jameser, by the way, if I just quote like that. I was raised in the King James kind of church. So anyway, and then he said to her that he was the Messiah, like point blank, I'm the Messiah. Then in chapter 5, he heals a lame man and talks about being the Son of God. Now all the time this is happening, he's getting more and more notoriety. More people start showing up to where Jesus is, okay? Because really cool stuff's kind of happening. I mean, can you imagine having this kind of stuff happen, right? Chapter 6, all that happens there is he feeds 5,000, okay? 5,000, feeds them. Big buffet, the whole thing. And then after that, how do you follow up feeding 5,000? Well, you walk on water, right? Okay, so this is extraordinary. Then in chapter 7, he's teaching in the temple. He's fed 5,000. He's walked on water. He's healed people. He said he's the Son of God. He said he's Messiah. He has a following. He is like, how many rabbis of the day have 5,000 people following around? Like, none of them. Like, he is the biggest ticket in town. He is the mega church. He is all of that. And so in chapter 8, he returns to the temple, and that's the setting for this story. He returns to the temple to teach. And imagine if you were in that area and you knew Jesus was going to come, or you thought he was going to come, you're getting down there, right? Imagine if it's in the United States today. What does that look like? What does it feel like? It feels like the biggest, most popular speaker in all of the United States is going to show up at this huge church, and everybody's already come, and they're waiting for him to be there. Imagine that in your mind, okay? And so the music's playing, worship team, and we've got everything going, and we're woo, 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 and everybody's excited, and you can just feel the excitement in the air. Maybe like the Super Bowl that's going to happen later today, right? Okay, a big, giant crowd of people. And if it were the United States today, it would look or feel something like this in honor of the Super Bowl. He stands 6 feet 2 inches tall and 185 pounds. Born in Bethlehem of a virgin, he started his ministry at the age of 12, but the miracles didn't begin till the age of 30. He says he's the Son of God. Give it up for Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah. All right. So imagine the entry. Now we know, okay. All right, thank you. We know that Jesus would never have allowed that, okay, because that's not what he's about. He's not that kind of a guy. But that's the kind of spectacle he was in John chapter 8, right? Imagine if you saw him, if you were one of the people who were fed, if you saw a lame man healed, if you heard the stories of him walking on the water, what it would be like to go watch him, right? So there we are. We have the setting. We're now in John chapter 8. He's been introduced. He begins to teach. And then, as he teaches, you hear this sound, okay? This interrupting sound. Something from the side, from over there. So now I'm going to shift out of my notes over to, and I'm reading out of the ESV, starting with the second verse. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. Woo, woo, woo. And all the people came to him and sat down, and he taught them. And then the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, in the word, if it's scribes and Pharisees, that's just like, that's the enemy. Okay? I can't remember a time in the Word when they talked about the Pharisees and they said it in a good way. Oh, hey, the Pharisees are here. No, it was never like that. So the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing in her midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such woman, so what do you say?" This they said to test him, that he might have some charge to bring against him. And then he bent down and he started writing in the dirt. Now think about it for a second. That sounds pretty standard, right? I can't imagine it being like that. Not from a word by word standpoint, but kind of from an emotional standpoint. Imagine you are the woman and you are in your home. And a group of Pharisees, let's just say a dozen or 15 or 20, come to your home and they take you away. So sometimes we imagine that, like this scene up here. By the way, these pictures, I hand drew them myself. Or maybe I used AI to generate pictures. But so here's one view of it. Okay, you've got the lady and you've got Jesus and people kind of hanging around. Go to the next one. I tried again. So I've got him sitting there drawing in dirt, and I've got the lady on the right, and I got, people kind of hanging out. And let's go to the third one. And then he's just sort of sat there looking at her like with a blank look on his face like, what? And then you have the guys all around. I wanted him to look more angry, but all I ended up with was people who, look at their hands. They had the weirdest looking fingers I have ever seen. So AI does not do good with fingers, all right? So, and Pastor, you remember those Bibles we used to get when we were in like little kids? And they would have the Bible. If you guys got little kid Bibles 40 years ago, they would have these drawings in the Bible that they were this artwork that would depict a scene. You'd be going through the Bible, all of a sudden this picture would pop up. They look just like this. Do you remember that, Pastor? They're just like this AI stuff. So I don't think any of these are even close, because what would you be like if you were the woman who was going to this spot? You already know you're dead. You're dead. Like dead. You know you've been caught in adultery. You know you've been caught in sin. The scribes and the Pharisees are not there to bring you down to have a nice conversation and send you on your way. You're not going to the principal's office to get attention. Okay, you're going to miss lunch today. You're going to sit in detention. The end result, according to the law, was she was going to get stoned and she was going to be buried that day. What would it be like if you were that person? Would you be walking along like this and looking like, hey, here I am? Like, hey, where are we going, guys? What are we doing? Like, are we going to go talk to that Jesus guy? She knew. My guess is they're dragging her, kicking, screaming. Okay, she's hysterical. None of these pictures show any person up there being hysterical. In my imagination, they threw her on the ground. Her clothes were probably torn. Her face, she's probably ghost white and screaming and yelling because you have thousands of people hanging around, right? That's what it seems like. And so you get this commotion. And this commotion is these people are dragging, they're angry, and they're telling her, you're a sinner. You're going to die today. And she knows that she's done. The desperation, I can only imagine the desperation on her face. So they bring her to Jesus. And they throw him down in front of her. And she's there, and she's looking at him, and they are finding a way to trick Jesus Christ. The law says she's an adulteress and she needs to be stoned and killed today. What do you say? And thank you, Kyle, he's drawing in the dirt. Probably trying to find those nails. So then there's this pause. They're like looking at him. Can you imagine the hush? And finally the scribes and Pharisees say, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do, Jesus? What are you going to do? You can't just sit there. What are you going to do? What's your decision? Tell us what you're going to do. And then you go writing again. Now imagine the pause. What do we do with that? Okay, I mean, you're the scribes and Pharisees. You have the knowledge of all the books. You're educated. You don't know how to answer the question. You don't know what to do. You have no idea what to do. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw the stone at her or cast the first stone in the King James. And once more he bent down and wrote to the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. Interesting, they would say that. The older, wiser ones just looked at it and said, we got no answer for that. We got no answer for that. I got nothing. And then the younger ones look around and see the older ones walk away. The youngest of which, they're the fiery ones. They're the ones that have the most emotion. They're not wise. They haven't had the chance. When I was 25 years old, I thought I knew way more than I think I know now. Isn't that just life? The young ones, they're excited, they're fired up, they're going to fix it, they're going to solve, and they're going to be all about it. They're still ready to go, and they look around, and the older ones have all just walked away. And then they're torn between, do I do this or do I not do this? And the people who I trust and so they too walk away. And the crowd's still silent, except for probably this murmur that you hear. As the scribes and Pharisees walk away, people are going, they're just murmuring, oh, I can't believe it. Look what just happened. They're walking away. I thought they were going to stone her, but they're walking away. And this murmur starts to happen. And then pretty soon he looks up again. He goes, woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you? Now, imagine being the woman. You're there. You're dead. You've experienced what you believe is going to be your last day. And you're going to be stoned to death. Think about that for a second. How many rocks does it take to kill someone by throwing rocks at them? Imagine that death. To have rocks, so many rocks thrown at you that you literally die from repeated blunt force injury. Did they have like stacks of rocks? Like, how many rocks does that take? Were they going to haul her over to a spot where they had a big stack, a mound of rocks that were big enough to do damage? We're not talking about like river rock pebbles, what we put on our driveway or something. These are substantial rocks. What does that look like? But she knows that was what her fate was going to be. And he says, where are your accusers? He said, they've all left. He said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and from now on sin no more. Thank you, Kyle. Go and sin no more. That is an incredible story. It's an incredible story. It stays on my heart because it shows the value of the woman. See, one of the things about the pastor and the Beatitudes, we've had the beauty of having the Beatitudes and going one by one through them. And it's interesting, one of the things I've been thinking about for years about that is that not only is it as a roadmap, kind of like what you've described, but if you think about it, Jesus flipped the world when he was talking about the Beatitudes. The people in that day and age who had the power and the influence, who were the ones that were that controlled their world, were not the ones he talked about in the Beatitudes. He didn't say, blessed are the rich, right? He said, blessed are the poor. He didn't say, blessed are the arrogant. He said, blessed are the meek. So if we flip the Beatitudes into our world today, our world will say, well, blessed are the rich. Blessed are the proud and the arrogant. Blessed are the ones who are loud and boastful. Blessed are the ones who have the most followers on Facebook and TikTok and, right? Blessed are the ones, not that who do righteousness sake, blessed are the ones who push the envelope and go farther than anyone else will to show how important they are. Blessed are the ones who are the most outward about their sin. That's what our world would do. But interestingly enough, it's kind of the same as the world here. Let me tell you about that a little bit. Because what I want you to do now is I want you to put yourself in the story. Who would you have been had you been there? Who would you have been? Think about it. Who are the characters? Well, the main character, Jesus. A lot of us have read the Bible, and I don't know about you, but when I put myself in the story in the Bible, oftentimes I put myself as the hero. Like, I'm going to be the guy that's going to do the right thing. Pastor, have you ever done that, read a story and thought, oh, I'd do that, right? I'd be that guy. You know, like he's picking his disciples. I bet he would have picked me. Vincent of Springfield, of his great wisdom, he has chosen Vincent to be one of his disciples. Right? Like, no. No. He didn't pick his disciples based on their strengths. He picked them oftentimes based on their weakness, on their willingness to follow, even when it didn't seem logical. Counterintuitive, as we would say. So, we sometimes imagine ourselves being in a situation like this, saying we're maybe like Jesus. But you know, we just couldn't be, could we? We couldn't be that. Because in this situation, as we roll through some slides here, Jesus was love perfected. They brought her to him, caught her in sin. But he wasn't just love, he was love perfected. Jesus, next slide, was grace to this person in this situation. Grace perfected. Jesus was wisdom perfected. We think about, if you go back and read about King Solomon and the baby that was brought before him, the story about the two mothers, the one mother's child died in the middle of the night, stole another baby, and they ended up going to Solomon, and Solomon said, cut the baby in half and give half to each of them. And the mother of the child said, no, go ahead and give it to the other one. Because the mother who didn't give birth to that child didn't care. And Solomon knew who the real mother was because he did that. That's why one of the reasons why Solomon is known by his wisdom. Jesus is wisdom perfected in this situation, wasn't he? He could have just said, well, you're right, the law says stone her. But no. Jesus was mercy perfected. In this story, he was mercy. His mercy for this woman was perfect. Jesus was compassion perfected. Jesus, next slide, was forgiveness perfected in this story. We think we're going to be a hero like Jesus was. We can't touch it. He was forgiveness perfected. Jesus was knowledge perfected in this story. Perfect knowledge. He knew the word. He knew the law. He knew what was in their hearts. He was knowledge perfected. Type a quote here. I'm glad that came out. Jesus, here's another piece though. He was accountability perfected. Modern day church, we go back and forth. We have those of us who have come from a Pentecostal kind of background, and we love the law, and we love being right? Pointing out flaws and being right. We also know that there are churches, and truly, God blesses churches, whose focus is grace and forgiveness and love and compassion. And the interesting thing about that is that they end up coming at odds against each other every once in a while. You have the churches that talk about compassion and love oftentimes don't talk about accountability. Okay, God loves you however you are, and that is absolutely the truth. It's clearly shown in this story. Okay? But we also know God is a God of judgment. We know that there's a heaven and a hell. We know that if we are not right with God, hell is our eternal location, right? So there is a God of judgment. So the churches that focus on judgment and the churches that focus on mercy and forgiveness sometimes are at odds with each other. Well, where was Jesus? He was perfectly accountable in the middle of that. Think about this for a second. Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And then there's two parts to the next sentence. Neither do I condemn you. Well, there you go. Love perfected. The churches that focus on that see that first part of that sentence, and that's where their focus is. They kind of get fuzzy on the second part. The second part is, go and sin no more. They didn't say, hey, just live your life. I love you, live your life, it's all good. Right? He said, go and sin no more. The implication there is that, or at some point in time, judgment will come. Jesus found the balance between the love and the accountability that is hard for today's church. Thank you. That's hard for the church to understand. So, are you Jesus in the story? Let's just say no, because I don't have love perfected. I don't have grace perfect. I don't have any of those things perfected. I'm imperfect. So I can't be Jesus in the story. I can't be the hero. What about, are you the woman? Are you the woman in the story? Are you simply in a space where you're just living in sin with no hope and no place to go? She was hopelessly lost in a destructive life pattern. In the word, they say adultery, caught in the act of adultery. It could have been anything. It could have been anything. But she was hopelessly lost. No light at the end of the tunnel. Nowhere to go. Nothing. Just a pattern of sin. And in this story, she was meeting her end. Her end was that day. And she was literally in her last moments on earth. And Jesus Christ stepped in and said, where are your accusers? And she says, they're not here. He changed her future in a moment. When I was 9 years old, he changed my future in a moment. That's what he does. He does that really well. Just in case you wondered. He changed her future in a moment. In a moment. So if you're the woman, when the whole world is dragging you in front of a tribunal to end you, Jesus can change you in a moment. The third, are you a Pharisee? Are you a scribe and Pharisee? You realize that? Are you? I'm telling you. Okay, who are the scribes and Pharisees of that day? Well, let's start with they knew how to read. Right? You realize that everybody learning how to read is kind of a modern history thing. bring us up into the 1600s where we kind of said maybe everybody should read. When they started making printing presses, prior to that, the vast majority of the population couldn't read, which means they didn't have the Bible. It wasn't even printed. The King James Version is a 1611 version, right? If you read that in every King James, I spent so much time as a kid in the King James because we didn't have any other. Like we're old enough that we didn't have any other Pentecostal sort of version. It was just King James, okay? So, but the whole concept of reading, like everybody that was just there weren't really scholars, but the scribes and the Pharisees were. And they controlled the information about their, like the religion, what they were teaching. They were the ones, they were the leaders, they were the rule makers. Imagine a world in which the Pentecostal people or the evangelical people in the United States had the ability to point at someone and say, "You're a sinner, we're going to execute you today." Would we want to have that kind of power? Think about the structure right there. They could actually do that legally. The Romans sort of gave them the ability to do that. Hey, they're your people, and if they're violating your law, if you want to stone them to death, that's up to you. Right? They kind of stayed out of it. I can't imagine the United States government staying out of it. So imagine us in that day. We're knowledgeable. We know the word. We kind of make rules about what it's like to join. Like, right? We're joining the church, and we kind of have our group and our club, and we kind of get kind of judgmental, don't we? We kind of get a little bit judgmental about who's in and who's out, and what's good and what's bad, and our interpretation. I hate to say it, but in some ways, the modern evangelical church is a little bit more like the scribes and the Pharisees than maybe we're comfortable with. I'm kind of guessing if I was there personally, that's where I'd have been. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be that kind of judgmental. They were keepers of the law. They were people of authority. They were judgmental. They were powerful in the Jewish community. And they were very opposed to change. I think that's where I think that's where I've been. Right there. Right there. They were the ones that drugged this person in front of Jesus, trying to trick him. I don't want to be that kind of judgmental. And the fourth group, the onlookers. There was a fourth group. You got the onlookers. Remember, first part of the story, thousands of people were hanging out waiting for this big spectacle, hoping to see some kind of cool miracle. Some of them, if you read about it, some of them thought he was actually from Satan. Some of them thought maybe he was the Son of God. Some of them thought that he was just a magician. Some of them just wanted to kill him. Like in the previous chapter, they were trying to figure out a way to get him and go execute him, but they weren't ready to do that yet. So the onlookers, they're just like, there's going to be thousands of people in the Super Bowl today. Thousands. And there are going to be people watching on TV in the millions, and we're all just watching the game. We're not in the game. We're not a part of the game. We're just watching the game. And that's what literally hundreds, if not thousands of people were doing that day. They were watching all of this happen. If you're an onlooker, don't just watch the game. Get in the game. Get in the game. Our churches are filled with people who come because the music's good, who come because they have friends, who are just essentially being entertained. And there are people here being entertained. But we need more than to be entertained. We need to get in the game. Get on the court, get on the field. Get in the business. Decide which side you're going to be on and go full bore. So many sit back and watch the miracles without ever making a commitment. And they just went on, waiting for the spectacle. And the spectacle finally ended. And they died. They lived their life and they died, never having experienced true life. Never having experienced living water. Never having experienced a true miracle other than to just watch it. So, where does that leave us today? Okay. Which one are you? The story is amazing. But it's just a story if we don't do something with it. Personally, I'm in the game. So I know I'm not that group. But am I a Pharisee? Fortunately, I used to be in the place of the woman. But Jesus changed my life in a heartbeat. Because his love and compassion and mercy and grace and accountability are all perfected. I can't touch that. So I'm just hoping today that as you look at this and you see this, that you put yourself in one of those places and decide how you're going to change to be more like Jesus himself.
We hope you've enjoyed this message from Grace Church. Make sure to stay connected throughout the week online at gchurch.us and on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks again for listening, and have a great week.